And while you're putting your hands together from all over the world, people are listening. And let's put your hands together and make welcome all of our visitors on television, internet, Roku, and church app as well. Thank you all so much for tuning in and being in our service today. I'm preaching from the book of Psalms, chapter number 51. Out of all the Psalms that David wrote, and he wrote most of the 150 of them, this is the most transparent out of all the Psalms that David wrote. Because this is the psalm where David gets right with God with some bad mistakes he had made in his life. He said in verse 1, "Have mercy upon me, O God, according to thy loving kindness, according to the multitude of thy tender mercies, blot out my transgressions. Wash me thoroughly from my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin. For I acknowledge my transgressions, and my sin is ever before me. Against thee and thee only have I sinned and done this evil in thy sight, that thou mightest be justified, and that when thou speakest, and be clear when thou judgest. Behold, I was shapen in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me. Behold, thou desirest truth in the inward parts, and in the hidden part thou shalt make me to know wisdom. Purge me with hyssop, and I shall be clean. Wash me, and I shall be whiter than snow. Make me to hear joy and gladness, that the bones which thou hast broken may rejoice. Hide thy face from my sins, and blot out all my iniquities." Now watch how he closes this confession in verse 10. "Create in me a new heart, O God," because that's where it starts. "And renew a right spirit within me." David knew that if he was going to get right with God, the first thing he was going to have to deal with above his confession is God giving him back the right spirit that he once had. I want to preach today on the subject of a contaminated spirit. Did you know there's a difference between the soul of man and the spirit of man? Though both of them, by definition, refer to life, they differ in their root meaning. The soul refers to the eternal aspect of man, but your spirit refers to the breathing and earthly aspect of man. That's why some call it the spirit of life or the spirit of this life. You understand that your soul can only be affected in its destiny either by Satan or by God. But your spirit can be affected by yourself as well as your surroundings. David asked God to renew a right spirit. That word renew means to restart, to restore, to do again, to repeat, or to bring back as it once was. This is the same word where we get our root word revive or revival. God is talking to David and dealing with him about his sin, and David said, "I want you to rekindle a right spirit within me." Did you know getting right with God doesn't start with you living right? You getting right with God doesn't start with you having high standards. Getting right with God begins with a right spirit. And once your spirit is right, it shows up in your actions, and it shows up in your standards as a result of the right spirit. You understand the difference? Now, here's why people burn out on God. When you go to a church that puts the Bible out strong and heavy like we try to do, sometimes we're so focused on cleaning up our actions and cleaning up our standards that even though we have the right standard and the right action, we're doing it in the power of the wrong spirit. That's why people, you see them, they look like they live right one day, and then they're wild hog crazy the next. Because they may have looked right on the outside, but there was still something wrong with them on the inside. I'd rather have people that are right on the inside open to truth than a bunch of Pharisees that thinks they got it all down pat and they look down their nose at everybody else. I don't have time to pastor people like that. Because I know if I can just get your spirit in tune with God, the Holy Ghost will deal with you and I just like he did David, and it'll manifest itself in our outward appearance and in our actions. Did you know your spirit can be depressed? Did you know your spirit can be deceived? Did you know your spirit can be defected or flawed? Did you know you could be sitting here with a bad spirit and really not even know it? One day Jesus was walking outside of a city and he told his disciples, go make yourself ready there and tell them I want to lodge for the night. And the Bible said that the city, they were Gentiles, refused to let Jesus come. When Jesus got to the edge of the city, he looked at his disciples and said, they don't want us, what should we do? And the disciples, closest to Jesus and anybody else in the world, said this, let's bring down fire from heaven like Elijah and just burn the suckers up. And Jesus turned around at the closest people to him in the world, and this is what he said, ye know not what manner of spirit ye are of. Your spirit can be wrong, but you are so forceful in it that you've convinced yourself it's right. When's the last time you've let God deal with your spirit? When's the last time you've let God absolutely deal with your attitude, your outlook, your conversation within yourself, your own conscience, your own being? How long has it been since God has renewed a right spirit in your life? There are many things that happened in David's life that caused him to develop a bad spirit. This is the product of several unclean streams of water being permitted to flow in and corrupt the river of David's life. And just like David had experiences in his life that made him get a foul or bad or unclean or contaminated spirit, you and I will face some of these things. And if you're not careful, even in the midst of being right, you're going to find yourself being wrong. And that's due to the fact that you've allowed it to affect your spirit about you in a negative way. Let me show you what I believe contributed to David having a contaminated or a poisoned or a corrupt spirit. Number one, if you will go through David's life, you'll find that there were 5 major events that really made David go sour. I want to mention a couple of them to you. Number one, it's when David had to divide himself from some of the best friendships that he ever had in life. You know, it's a hard thing to have a friend that you trust in, really trusted in, only to find out that they were going to be untrue to you. David faced that in his life. One of the best friends David had in life was the president of Israel. He was the first king or president of Israel, and his name was Saul. And Saul and David were so close together that Saul's son Jonathan had a love for David, and David had a love for him that was superior to anything else you'll read about in the Bible. David looked up to Saul. He respected him as his president. He was the first king ever to be anointed as the president of Israel. And David got close to him because he was his president. David got close to Saul because they went to church together. You remember when Saul had taken over the kingdom and he's trying to clear up all the mess from what the judges had left behind. Samson was the last judge, and man, Israel was doing that which was right in their own eyes. I mean, Israel was a mess. And Saul would get so burdened down with decisions and problems, the Bible said he would call for David. And David played the harp. And the Bible said that David would come into the inner chamber of Saul, and Saul would sit there, and David would play as a musician. He would play his harp. He would play hymns and songs before the Lord. And the Bible said it soothed the spirit of Saul. I mean, they were so close, they went to church together. They worshiped together. They were in the presence of God together. He was David's king. I mean, how much closer can you get? I tell you how much closer you can get. David ended up marrying his daughter, his youngest daughter, Michal. So Saul is not only his king, he's not only his praise partner, he's his father-in-law. And boy, if you would see them out in public, Brother McCarty, you'd say, now there's 2 close friends right there. There's 2 people right there that we used to call it 2 peas in a pod. There's 2 folks that'll be friends for years. There's 2 people right there that have the kind of friendships I want in my life. Then all of a sudden something stupid settled in. Something called jealousy. David had cut the head off of Goliath, and he had Goliath's head, and he's walking through the streets of Jerusalem. Saul is listening to the music. The young women are dancing. They're playing the drums and beating the tambourines, and they're singing a song. And here's what the song said. Saul has killed his thousands, but David has killed his tens of thousands. And Saul went home, and here's what the Bible said. He said, what else could David want except my throne? And a friendship so close that should have lasted forever was divided over something that wasn't even real or true anyhow. David didn't want his throne. My God, he was a 16-year-old boy. All he wanted to do was get back on the backside of the desert and take care of a handful of sheep and leave the crowds alone. He didn't care nothing about the women. He didn't care nothing about the music. But Saul allowed the devil to plant something in a relationship that wasn't even real. And it so severed their relationship that Saul spent the rest of his life trying to find David and kill him. And if you'll read all through 1 Samuel and the beginning of 2 Samuel, they never did get right with each other. They never spoke to each other again. They were never able to sit down and fellowship again. Saul never heard David play the harp again. David watched his king, his president, fall to nothing and die in suicide and disgrace. And it even affected David's home. I mean, what's Michal going to do? She loves her dad, but she loves her husband. Here's a girl that can't even go to a family get-together because either David's been out of shape or Saul's been out of shape. And the one time that Saul did allow David to come, the Bible said he hit a javelin, and when David got there, he tried to kill him. You think you got rough family get-togethers. You think your redneck crowd's a little on the edge. How'd you like to get the one where everybody brings a blade waiting to slice each other like a bunch of butchering hogs? And a friendship that should have lasted forever died, destroyed, because somebody got to thinking of something that wasn't even true. You can get a bad spirit because somebody you went to, somebody you talked to, somebody you prayed with, maybe even somebody you go to church with. It may even be somebody in your family has turned on you and done you wrong. They said things that wasn't even true. They get stuff started that was never said. Every family's got a drama queen in it. Every family's got a woman in their family that's got a tongue that'll reach from that wall to that wall. And they're not happy unless they're stirring something up. And now, Brother Anderson, we're living in a generation where families can't even get together anymore. They can't even worship together. You got people on this side of the church won't shake hands with people on this side of the church because Sister Smellfungus said something that wasn't even true in the first place. And now it comes in the church, it comes in your family, and it's all been out of hell. Divided friendships can cause you to get a bad spirit. Number two, a destroyed marriage can cause you to get a bad spirit. Michal was David's first wife. And I don't want to get belligerent here or mean, but I got problems with a man that wants to marry a girl named Michal. I'm telling you, that's always made me uncomfortable. It'd have been Michelle, or I'm telling you, man, we'd have had the chance. I'm not marrying Michal. You hear me? I'm not marrying Michal. Michal was the youngest of Saul's two daughters at the time, and David married her. You study the life of Michal, his own wife. Here he is, the greatest young warrior that Israel has ever known. Not one time in all the battles that David ever won for the greatest nation that was upon the face of the earth at that time, Brother Mannis, not one time does the Bible ever record that his wife met him and put her arms around him and said, I thank God for you. I'm glad you're in the battle. I'm glad you're a leader. I'm glad you're strong. No matter what David accomplished in his life, he never got an encouraging word from his mate. I'm going to tell you, your marriage is destined to fall if all you can see about each other is what's not perfect about each other. Because nobody's perfect. Do you understand that? We've all got drifts, we've all got flaws, and we've all got problems. So if every time you husband and wife sit down together and all you can talk about is how sorry the other one's been, you might as well file for divorce or murder, because your marriage is not going to make it. And here's David. He's lost the best friend he's ever had in his life. Now his wife is giving him no support when he's fighting the battles. She never supported him when he worshiped God. David worshiped God from the time he was a boy. Michal knew David worshiped God. But you remember when David was bringing the Ark of the Covenant back to Israel. And the Bible said as the Ark of the Covenant was coming back down the cobblestone street of Jerusalem, the Bible said David danced before the Lord. And his wife, the Bible said, was looking out the window. And when David got home, Michal said, well, I guess you showed yourself out now, big boy. You're supposed to be the king of Israel. There you are dancing up and down the streets like some kind of idiot having a seizure. And David said, let me tell you something, you little crook-nosed Jew. You hear me well. You think I made a fool of myself today? You wait till I get that thing in the tabernacle. You wait till the Shekinah glory of God falls. You hadn't seen nothing yet. Look up here at me. She should have been the first one saying, thank God for a husband that loves God. Thank God for a husband that'll go to church. Thank God for a husband that'll shout the victory. I'll tell you, men and women, something. The best cheerleader you ought to have in your life when it comes to serving God ought to be the person you're sitting next to. You women, bless God, some of you just want your husband saved enough to quit screwing around on you and quit blowing his paycheck on the bar. But when he gets serious about God, all of a sudden you're mean as hell and you blow out and the family's destroyed. Somebody say amen right there. You don't want your husband to live for God. You just want him to quit going to beer joints, sleeping with other women. You're not serious about God. When your wife stands up, you men ought to be the first ones saying, hallelujah, honey, brag on Jesus. Tell it like it is. You ought to be sitting in the pew, lifting your hands together. Oh, some of you looking pale. I understand. I understand. I know you don't like this kind of preaching, but I'm going to preach it anyhow. She never stood by him during the times of his emotional discomfort. I got news for you folks. Not all of us live on the mountaintop all the time. I'm not always happy-go-lucky jumping across the stage shouting and sweating and singing. There's times I'd like to wring your neck. You drive me crazy. You don't listen to anything I say. You want to talk to me, then you do exactly the opposite that I tell you to do. Quit wasting my time. You got your mind made up? Shut up and do it. Leave me out of it. And there's times when I need support. I just needed to be quiet. There's times I just want everybody to shut up. When I come in the house, I don't want my wife rattling off, foaming at the mouth, diarrhea of the tongues. There's times I just want you to shut up. I don't want to sit down. I don't want television playing. I don't want music playing. And it's during those times that my wife needs to come over and hug me and minister to me and kiss on me and love me and let me know everything's all right. And you men, you don't get so calloused and hard that when you come home and your wife's quiet and she's looking down all the time, she feels defeated and unwanted and overlooked and underappreciated. You're the only one that can change that. You need to tell her she's the best thing that's ever happened to you. By the way, you scumbags would still be on Scum Row if you didn't have a good wife putting up with your nonsense. Come on, Tyler, clap. She's the only woman that could put up with your nonsense. We got to be each other's biggest supporters. Michal was never there when David was going through a valley. She was never there when he was worshiping God. She was never there when he was enjoying a victory. And slowly but surely, their marriage began to erode. Some of you have walked down the bitter trail of a divorce. And I'm sorry. And because you got into a circumstance that you couldn't help, sometimes when you go to a church and preachers preach hard, you feel like a second-class Christian because you've been wounded and hurt. And sometimes you even feel like you've been rejected because of something you couldn't help. David ended up with 8 wives and 19 sons besides his daughters. But I want to say to you, there are times that marriages are destined to fail, and I don't like it. I don't like divorce. God doesn't like divorce. The Bible doesn't like divorce. But there are times when people are so stupid and hell-bent, they think they got it all figured out. The grass is greener on the other side. Some of you women going through the change of life, you think the grass is a little bit greener on the other side. Let me warn you, there's a septic tank there. That's why the grass is greener on the other side. And maybe something happened that you can't help. And I refuse to let this church be the kind of church that when people come in here and they've been hurt and wounded and rejected and they feel dirty and they feel like a failure, I refuse to pastor a church where you look down your nose on people that's been through stuff that you've never had to go through and you've never understood. This is a place of healing. This is a place of mending. This is a place of a second chance. You don't have to throw the rest of your life away. God is a forgiving God. If your marriage failed, do the best you can. Get up, look up. God's still God. You still got a life. He's still got a purpose. He's still got a plan. Don't let a destroyed marriage be the final chapter of your life. Number 3, sometimes you can get a bad spirit because out of nowhere, there's the death of a loved one. David's with Bathsheba now, and they've got a baby coming, and everything's well, and no doubt they've built the extra room. They found out it was a boy, so they painted everything blue. God help a mama that knows she's having a boy and paints everything pink. Painted everything blue. They had the baby showers, everything was fine. And from out of nowhere, a healthy baby was born, and the next thing you know, David is standing at the graveside of a little blue box, burying his son. This unexpected pronounced death devastated David. Sometimes a sudden death of a loved one can cause our spirit to experience shock, or maybe even develop questions, and sometimes even be broken because of it. It's kind of like this. We just wish we had more time to prepare for the final day, or we needed a day to hear another word, or to enjoy one more hug, kiss, or goodbye. But all of a sudden, from out of nowhere, you get a devastating call that's about to change you for the rest of your life. That somebody you loved more than life, without warning, is gone. And without even meaning to, you can get a bad spirit about you. Why would God let my baby die? Why would God let my daddy die alone in a room? Why would God let my mama get Alzheimer's and not even know us? And not meaning to, when you watch them die, you develop this spirit that's against God. Many years ago in our church, we had a family that came and they prayed for 12 years for a baby. He was my security there in that church. Big old boy. And him and his wife prayed for 12 years, and she finally conceived. And man, our church went nuts. We had baby shower stuff. I mean, it was just crazy, the stuff they got her. And they did one of them sonograms, and the baby's moving and kicking and growing and all this stuff, little boy. She went out and bought a little tuxedo to bring it home from the hospital in, for the pictures and everything. A little tuxedo with a bow tie, black and white. And going through the birth canal, that baby lodged and choked to death and died. She hemorrhaged, rushed her into surgery, immediate emergency surgery to save her life. She was dying as well, and removed all possibilities of ever having a child. What do you tell a lady that's waited 12 years? They've already built the room. It's already blue. We've already had the showers, and matter of fact, she's even got the little tuxedo to bring him home in. And I ended up putting that tuxedo on him to bury him. How do you explain to a mama that God's still in control and he doesn't make mistakes when you are just burying the only child you're ever going to have in your lifetime? And I went to her and her husband and I sat them down and I had prayer with them. I said, now you listen, being a Christian doesn't mean you always understand God, because that would make you God. But being a Christian means you can always trust God. You may not be able to trace him sometimes, but you can always trust him. And I said, if you don't get right, if you don't stop this, you're going to get a bad spirit. While I'm preaching tonight, I don't even want to tell you where and how they're living, because you wouldn't believe me. And it all started because of an unexpected death, and a bad spirit came upon them. Some of you this year are going to get a phone call that's going to be devastating to you. Miss Tino buried her 25-year-old daughter-in-law last week. Mrs. Collins is here. I went to the funeral of their little 4-year-old granddaughter. She's sitting here today. Miss Ann, I buried your daddy. Used to sit right there and shout. I visited your daddy yesterday. Doesn't even know he's in the world. You asked me to explain all of that, you'd be out of your ever-loving mind. But if you're not careful and you don't understand that somewhere out yonder God's got a plan that we can't understand, without even realizing it, you're going to develop a spirit about you that's going to be contrary to what God wants you to be like. Who knows what we're going to face before this year is over? Number 4, I tell you another thing that knocked David into a bad spirit. He had disobedient children. David loved his children. He tried to be a good dad. He wanted them to succeed in life. He wanted them to be happy. He wanted them to prosper, and he wanted them to serve the Lord. But it seems like when his kids got grown, they turned out to be everything David didn't want them to be. His own son, through incest, and admittedly molested his own sister. Amnon raped Tamar. When Absalom, the brother, found out about it, Absalom had a party and invited Amnon. And when Amnon got there, he killed his own brother. Can you imagine trying to live for God? And a knock on the door and saying, David, I got news. We just seen your daughter. She's walking down the street and she's weeping and she's crying. And David said, what's wrong with my daughter? And they said, I hate to tell you, but your own son raped her. My son raped my daughter. And David sat down, no doubt his head in his hands, thinking, how can this happen to the king of Israel? There's another knock at the door, and David goes to the door and says, look, what's wrong now? I've already heard about Tamar. And they said, oh, that's not it. Said Absalom had a party after he found out what happened, which is David's other son. And he said he invited Amnon over, and when Amnon got there, they killed your son, David. Your own son killed his brother. David said, I've never raised my kids. What is going on with my kids? There was another knock at the door, and they said, David, get your suitcase. We got to go. What's going on? Your rebellious son, your long-haired son, Absalom, he's just rode into Jerusalem with a bunch of rebels. He's taken over the throne. He's declaring to be king, and they're on their way to kill you. David, your own son's trying to kill you. My God, I'm trying to raise my kids right, and they want me to die? David runs and he crosses over the ford of the Jordan, and all of a sudden a messenger comes and said, David, you got to come. You're not going to believe this. Absalom was riding out through the field looking for you, and he just had his hair put in a perm, and it got caught in the limbs of the tree, and the mule walked on, and Joab and his men surrounded Absalom and put 3 darts in his heart. David, I hate to tell you, but your other boy is dead. That rebel's dead. You don't think that won't mess your spirit up? When you train your kids to work hard and they won't hit a lick at a snake. When you train them to be honest and they steal everything they can get their hands on. When you have trained them to be upright citizens, but they have no character at all within themselves. You don't think you don't sit at home and beat yourself up and say, where did I fail? Where did I go wrong? What did I do wrong? The Bible said that Israel were the children of God, the Bible said. And if God can have trouble with his children, I promise you we can have trouble with our children. And if you're not careful, I'm preaching this morning. You're not clapping, but I'm preaching. If you're not careful, you'll let a rebellious kid that's making their own bad decisions not only go in a hole themselves, they'll drag you in the hole with them. And as long as you parents pay their bills and bail them out and let them steal from you and pawn from you, they'll die broke and you'll die broke. You need to look at that crowd and say, you need to get right with God, and I'm not funneling and paying for your disobedience against God. Amen. Good preaching, Brother Kid. And their children can make you have a bad spirit. The last one is you can have distorted emotions. You know, sometimes when you look at men and certain women, you think, man, emotionally they're strong. But really, we all have weak spots in our emotions. It was that long-suffering David that played the harp that took a sword and cut the skirt of Saul. It was this David, the sweet psalmist of Israel, that committed adultery with another man's wife, then turned around and had him murdered. It was this David, this forgiving, long-suffering David, that on his deathbed looked at Solomon and said, when Shimei threw those rocks at me, I've never forgot it. And when he dies, I want him to die with his own blood and his gray hair. David's emotions had gotten so out of whack, he didn't even know right from wrong anymore. Now you think about compiling this. You've just lost your best friend. Your marriage is a mess. Your baby's died. Your kids have gone bad. Your emotions are like a roller coaster. You better believe it's possible to get a wrong spirit and not even know you've got it. Now in closing, I did a double check on my life preaching this message. Here's 3 things God told me to do to keep my spirit right. I'm not going to preach them. I'm just going to mention them and I'm done. Number 1, stop blaming others for the mess you're in. 18 times in these 10 verses, David addressed himself and not one time mentioned anybody else. Number 2, admit when and where you went wrong. Because in verse 6, God desires honesty from his children. Number 3, don't worry about other people. Just seek God's forgiveness and approval. 16 times in 10 verses, David reached out to God and said, would you forgive me? Can I ask you a question? Does your spirit need to be adjusted? Do you need to get kind of more on a positive lane with your life? Do you wake up negative, live negative, and go to bed negative? Is that really the lot of your life? I thought Jesus came that we could have life more abundantly. You should be happier, more content, dedicated, and sold out now than you've ever been in your whole life because of the difference that Jesus made in your life. So I'm starting from the pulpit, not the pew today, and I'm asking God to take the reins of my heart and try my spirit and see if there be any wicked way in me. Let's stand with our heads bowed and our eyes are closed.
These are the days of Elijah, declaring the word of the Lord. And these are the days of your servant